stream and Twitter Live, YouTube Live, and Facebook Live. So let's get the show on the road. And please do contribute your questions. They're always very helpful. Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your weekly update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim, and today we'll be discussing the importance of children's museums with special guests, Melissa Kaiser, CEO at Discovery Children's Museum in Las Vegas. Aileen Hefferren, CEO and Director of the Children's Museum of Manhattan. Aileen, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And Sarah Cole, CEO of the Glazer Children's Museum in Tampa, Florida. So we have Las Vegas, Manhattan, and Tampa together on the same program. And a reminder to Zoom attendees that we will take 3 snap polls during the show and we'll announce results. And questions submitted through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. So thank you all for joining us. It's just wonderful to have you. I'd like to just sort of set this up by predicating our discussion with the idea that children's museums help children develop skills through hands-on learning and also forge connections between children, their families, other families, and the learning experience. So if we could start by sort of taking stock of where we are in the state of the art of children's museums and in the self-guided experience provided by museums. Melissa, could you paint us a picture of what happens when a child and their family walk into your museum in Las Vegas?
Oh, thank you, Mark. So glad to be here. Wow, well, we're in Las Vegas. This is a show business town. This is a place where the expectation of our visitors is very high from a customer service standpoint. So for us, the orchestration of opening the doors, having one of our staff members greet the kids and say, "Are you ready?" To the line that's forming out the door into a 3-story space that, as you mentioned, is open-ended and kids get to make all about their day. But really, it's so much about the staff. It's so much about the training and the reception that they're able to give to every guest, whether it's we have a large Hispanic population here in Las Vegas, so we have a lot of bilingual educators, visitors that need a little more orientation, special needs visitors. So with 26,000 square feet of space, you can imagine it's a lot of ground to cover, but there's a real wow factor when you walk in. We have a 3-story summit climber right through the center of the museum that draws the kids right in. So that initial hook is a big part of how we get visitors having a great time coming back and telling others.
I love your reference to show business, right? Because it really is entertainment and that sort of entryway and how you experience that as a child and having enough visual feedback and then being able to go wherever you want. Aileen, how do you ensure that children have that initial charge that really sets the stage for the rest of the day?
Well, I think what Melissa was saying is sort of the anticipation of the arrival and the tremendous excitement. And you think about little 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 8-year-olds, and that anticipation for us, it's coming up a ramp and standing in line. And now with COVID, waiting for your timed entry and then having to show your vaccination status. So we're aware of the excitement. And that children handle that differently. There are some who are raring to go and can't wait to get in, and there are some who are already melting down. And that we're wanting to, support kids wherever they are. And I think that that's really, some of the beauty of the Children's Museum is that, you mentioned a minute ago, Melissa, the, kids with special needs, is that I think that our museums are able to cater to children with so many different learning styles, and whether they're, have special needs or not. You need that sort of that excitement and that drama and that thrill. And you also need to find places that are sort of a little bit more quieter where you can tuck aside and be able to regroup and experience it in different ways. So I'm sure there's kids who are immediately pulling out of their parent or caregiver's hand to scramble up that climber. And there are other ones who are going to want to stand and watch. And they may be getting as much out of that experience as the child who's already up to the top, maybe much to their parents' chagrin, as the one who's standing and fully taking it in, and that's how they're absorbing and enjoying and appreciating the experience for them.
It's interesting when you talk about the child who stands back, right? Your staffs need to be very sensitive to that. And sometimes, Sarah, when you see a child who is standing back, your staff will approach and will engage in a gentle way, right? So you have this tremendous expertise. It's something that we really don't think about, right? And we don't necessarily appreciate or compensate for it. If you look at somebody walking into an automobile showroom, right? We have the same behaviors reflected, but we have higher paid people who come in and cultivate that customer because there's money on the line. But when a child's education is on the line, there is a even higher degree of expertise that is required, but we don't necessarily think about that, nor do we necessarily have the wherewithal to compensate it. How do you cultivate a staff that has that kind of sensitivity at your museum in Tampa?
That's an amazing question. And, Aileen, I love you said it so well about, I think adults have an expectation of what a child should do. And, one of the big things for us has been really a shift towards being as child focused as possible. And, starting with our staff by saying, yes, the family has expectations and the parents have expectations and the teachers have expectations, but our job is to serve the child. And so really getting on their level, working with them, I think to your point, Mark, about having, I think it's important to have a staff that reflects the audience that you serve in all kinds of ways. And so having neurodiverse staff members has been a huge asset for us in having staff members who will say, I know what that child is going through right now because I go through it when I go to Busch Gardens or I go somewhere else. And so,
could you define neurodiverse in this sense? This is that's just so wonderful. It's such a wonderful point.
Yeah. So, we, neurodiversity as anyone whose kind of brain works a little differently. It includes things like ADHD. It includes specifically autism and related disorders and related diseases. But we have several staff who self-identify as autistic and have openly identified as they are autistic. I identify as neurodiverse myself, and a lot of us have children who are neurodiverse. And so I think having that kind of representation within our staff has been really, really helpful in helping all of our families really engage in a sensitive way, and also helping those parents see their child in a staff member becomes a really amazing moment.
So you have, it's interesting the dynamic that comes in. You also have the dynamic of families and parents, right? And guardians and friends. You don't necessarily know what the child's circumstance is. You don't know whether they're coming in with a traditional family or a non-traditional family, or some sort of other arrangement that provides a sort of supportive environment. So how do you, when you're encountering people, how do you ensure that the child feels like this is just the most, they're part of this group of other children, they're having a common experience, they're not being singled out? How do you engage with the family, Melissa? How do your people ensure that you're meeting everyone where they are and listening and learning? Because you're learning on the spot about that child, that family.
That's right. And for our team, it really starts with sensitivity training, lots of sensitivity training, diversity training, and us gathering feedback from our stakeholders about their visitor experience so that we can always continuously learn how to do a better job of making every visitor feel welcome at our museum. Putting bilingual signage throughout the museum was a big step that we took, especially in our toddler areas where the parents need a little more power to help them understand what they're learning, what they're teaching. And to Sarah's point, just having diversity on the floor, where you have the child that will open up to one of our educators. All of our floor staff are trained educators. They have backgrounds and degrees in science, technology, art, engineering, and math. They are educators in the presenter sense, in a way that kids are very drawn to them. So we let those relationships happen organically, of course. But it's a sensitive line. There's many parents who don't know how to play with their children or don't know how to engage in a gallery. So it takes that sensitivity of offering help and building trust that we're not trying to impose anything on the family, but that we're there.
So you're in the entertainment business, right, Aileen? Aileen, you're in the hospitality business, right?
Mhm.
Sarah, you're in the education business. You're in the customer service business, right? This is an incredibly sophisticated operation. Aileen, when you're working in an environment like Manhattan, where you have a huge number of choices in a very compressed space, and you are competing for attention, how do you function in a way, in terms of that sort of sense of competitive, being a competitive business, to ensure that you are attracting your share of the audience? How do you compete when you're so close to other organizations that are also trying to entice those hours, those customer hours, into their doors?
Right. No, I think it's a great question, and it's certainly, there are many, I think wonderfully many more opportunities, for families with young children than existed. Even I now have teenagers, when my boys were little, and so I think that what we as children's museums offer, what distinguishes us, is that we're really this research-backed, in terms of our exhibitions and what we're offering, and that we are able to work with families, with children from so many different backgrounds. And we're talking in terms of, learning styles, culturally, socioeconomically, so that they're able to access it. And because we have these trained educators, which, I echo what Sarah and Melissa were saying about that I think that that's what families value in this experience. And frankly, because of all of our, dedication to outreach work, that this is a space where people from so many different, socioeconomic backgrounds are able to access, that you wouldn't necessarily see, in a pay for play space. I mean, obviously we have, we charge admissions, we need to, keep the lights on and all that, but we also give away, wonderfully, a number of free passes, whether that's through, deep partnerships that we have with, say, Department of Corrections, Department of Homeless Services, Department of Education, and different cities have things like cool culture passes that, cater to families, are in a part of Head Start programs. So I think that is also what distinguishes us, and that, in a place like New York City, people want their children exposed to people from all different backgrounds, and they know that they can find that in a place like, the Children's Museum, where it's going to be fun while they're learning, and they know they're going to be well supported, and not just as, Sarah was saying, like, we're here to serve the children, but I think as also been pointed out, we're really helping the adults help the children, right? And that I think some of that is really, we're helping to empower the adults, because a lot of times, I felt like I was just trying to keep my head above water when my boys were little, and I didn't know what they were doing. And so when I would bring them to, the Children's Museum to see Mom, they would run around and push every button there was. And I'm thinking, oh, no, they should stop, and they should read this, and they should do this. And no, they shouldn't. They should run around, because that's who those two boys were. And another child is going to stand back and stand in the corner and watch it all. And to have the educator come over and say, look what he's taking in. Look how he's observing all that. Look at how he's processing that. It's tremendously, empowering to a parent. So I think that that's what, as children's museums, we're able to do for families, that distinguishes us from, many other options that are out there for families.
Sarah, are you communicating the value proposition? Because I saw you nodding while Aileen was talking. Do you systematically communicate your value proposition in this way, that you're actually providing training for parents, you're giving more time to individual children, you're able to segment a little bit more by observed experience than you can in a structured classroom? are you communicating to your various constituents, including your funders, including your community partners, that value proposition? And how do you do that? How do you make sure that they understand the value that you bring to each and every person who walks through your door?
That's a fantastic question. I would say we're working towards that. I think I'd love to say yes, perfectly, we're doing that, but we're not perfect at it yet by any stretch of the imagination. But it's been a huge focus for us of, starting with our board members, starting with our volunteers and some of our closest partners in funding of, bringing them to the table around learning about play and about what play actually does, but, about what child-focused and child-driven play looks like. And, kind of helping to unpack some of the things that they have misconceptions about our space. I just met with a board member last night who, it was wonderful the way he was telling me about, how he learned so much, and he went home and he talked to his wife, and, Aileen, exactly to your point of, and now my kids they're going around the house and they're making such a mess, but instead of getting mad, he's like, I get a little mad, but I realize that they're playing and I realize what they're doing and they're growing. And, right now we're doing it on a one-to-one basis. And our goal is to figure out how to scale that, how to get to a point where our entire community can see those things and can start to hear that and grasp that.
So you move parents from don't do that to do that some more.
Yeah. Hopefully. And, I think part of it is us also helping parents realize that we're not expecting them to be perfect. We're not expecting, it's when your kid gets a thing of chocolate syrup out of the fridge to go do science, it's incredibly frustrating and you're going to get mad about it. But, as you're cleaning up the chocolate syrup, to say, but let's think about what he learned. Let's think about what he did in this moment. And, maybe it's worth a little bit of time on scrubbing.
So we just completed a poll in which we asked which areas of learning does the Children's Museum advance most, and roughly 40% each said physical and neuromotor coordination and intellectual analysis and problem solving, with about 25% saying social interactions and cooperation. So you have a real balanced view of how these organizations add value. But I'd like to get a little bit behind the scenes. So if kids are doing stuff in a space, it's going to break, right? You're going to have a lot of stuff that needs to be maintained, needs to be made safe. And safety is a big part. So first of all, I'd like to go around the room and just talk about safety, particularly in this time of COVID. Could you each share how you're encountering people and what you're experiencing, what your staff is experiencing as you're promulgating your respective policies? Melissa, what are you doing in Las Vegas?
Yeah, and it's a great question. It's a very varied question across the country. We have it at the national level with our peers on a weekly basis. But in Las Vegas, we have kept the masks requirement throughout the entire pandemic for all visitors ages 2 and older. So really everyone. And even when mask mandates were relieved and left up to businesses, we made the decision to keep our masks because our audience was under 12 and unable to get a vaccine. To your point, safety is one of our core values. Physical safety, health is a major part of that. And our staff really needed training to communicate the message as to why the masks, because it is a ceaseless question and challenging for our frontline staff to have to become mask police. But, having that reason makes it so much easier.
Well,
I won't say
kids
it won't say
can't have vaccines right now, so they are particularly vulnerable, right?
Right. So that was really our, rationale for keeping the mask. But so many other safety measures Sarah was really instrumental to helping our museum reopen when we had to submit a reopening plan to the state with all of the mitigations, all of the exhibits we had to take off the floor, the plexiglass, the HEPA air filtration, the continuous cleaning, and then having our audience feel safe about what we were doing as well, so that they would want to come through our threshold. So it was a lot of marketing and promotion just to try to share that we are trying to provide a safe environment where kids can get that socio-emotional interaction they were missing from doing Zoom classrooms and have hands-on learning. And I think parents came away with feeling like we are not just a nicety in the community, but a necessity, especially when schools were shut down. So the safety piece, we did not see our numbers drop because we required masks. We actually had a stronger summer than we did in 2019, and that was with masks. So interesting.
So you kept your facility open when others were shutting theirs. You went to masks very quickly. Sarah, we've seen a lot in the news about the Florida debates about masks, not masks, and so on. What did you experience, and how have you implemented your policies?
Yeah, we've had some flex in our policies. When we first reopened, we were one of the first children's museums nationally to reopen. And it was, a little bit of forging a path with a machete through the wilderness. But, I think we have continued to be flexible. We did go to masks strongly suggested when the CDC came out with their statement about masks not required for vaccination, because we saw a massive decrease in compliance at that point. So, really what we were looking at is, it's one thing to have someone wear a mask when they first come in, and we had a lot of great compliance at that ticket counter. Great, yep, got my mask on. And once they were about 10 feet past the counter, the masks came off. And our staff, to that point of being mask police, we surveyed our staff and asked a couple questions. How safe do you feel with unmasked guests in the building? And how safe do you feel talking to someone about wearing their mask appropriately? And what we found was the mental health burden of being the mask police outweighed their concerns about their physical health. And that was really part of our decision to stay with a highly suggested. As Delta has kicked back up, we have not gone back to a mandate. There's a lot of debate and a lot of vitriol about masks that we're trying to cautiously walk around. We are not selling masks anymore. We are giving them to any person who walks in the door who doesn't need a mask. In the beginning, we had to sell them because the supply chains were so bad. We were losing a ton of money on masks. But anyone who wants a mask can get a paper mask on their way in the door. All of our staff are required to wear them front and back of house. We are not mandating vaccines, but we are tracking and incentivizing vaccines for our staff. And so, and then any child that comes in to our care, so anyone who's here for camp or a drop-off class or something like that, masks are absolutely required. We drew that line of when we're acting in loco parentis, the masks have to be required for the child. But when they are with their own family, we're going to allow the family to make that decision.
Well, I love what you're saying. You're basically trying to walk a line of respect and listening, but also setting some constraints where your staff, who are interacting with a lot of children, and some of those children just cannot be vaccinated, and it's very difficult to become the mask police. So you're saying keep yourself safe, keep others safe as well. And so you have some standards that are flexible, but also tie back to a logic of caring. Aileen, how are you approaching this, and how have you approached this?
I think it's definitely interesting to hear, and I think it's so much, as you said, like dependent on the area of the country. So, I think that with our team, it's the concern about their own safe and, being in New York City, being in Manhattan. But also I think it's for other families. And then what we were finding was that other families were also concerned where masks would slip, and so we always, again, going back to the training. And so we did de-escalation training last fall, we did de-escalation training and wanting it to be done like in a joyful way. So when we talk about 6 feet apart, it's the helicopter arms, and again, you're hiring people to be your educators who are warm and friendly, and you want to make this like exciting and fun. So instead of saying you can't come in because you don't have your mask on, it's as soon as you put your mask on, we'll be able to go onto the climber. Would you like to feed Alfie today? So it's all like sort of trying to do it in joyful ways. And I think that our team, we're since we reopened in October, we're requiring masks of everyone. And now being in New York City, there's an executive order that you have to be vaccinated if you're able to be, in order to not only to come into, we're considered indoor entertainment, into, a museum, but also that our staff also have to be vaccinated. And that is,
you're making a very interesting point about the de-escalation training, because one of the things that has been very clear, given the attention that has been provided to what law enforcement officers are encountering.
Yeah.
What you're saying is that the trauma of trying to adjudicate amongst people with different opinions as they come into your institutions, and it'll be true for art museums or science museums or natural history museums, right? You have to have a certain amount of skill at the front door to try and get the conversation into a place where compromise is possible, where, and you've got like this little microcosm here of America. It really does show how important these keystone institutions are, each in their respective place, to the whole social fabric. One of the things that we've just asked in a question that is going on right now is, have you been to a museum of any kind since the beginning of the pandemic? And 36% of people have said so far, no, they haven't. Did you see numbers drop off, each of you in your communities? And since your financial model is so dependent on attendance, whether it's through contributed revenue because people are supporting people who can come in for a reduced cost, or through the sales at the gate, how have you fared financially through the vagaries of attendance here, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a hard year. It's been a very hard year. We saw precipitous drop off in our attendance for the first, 2/3 of this past fiscal year. Starting in about April, we really started to see recovery. And I think, Melissa, to your point, while we did not beat 2019, we were definitely on par with 2019. We also, in not, hindsight being what it is, in January of 2020, we had actually raised our front gate prices. And so we got a whopping, 6 weeks of run out of that and then nothing. So this summer with those, our revenues actually were higher. Our earned revenues were higher year over year for the summer because our ticket prices were higher. And that just kind of worked out that way, which was really nice to be able to get that recovery. But yeah, we've definitely seen taken a hit. I think the other thing is, and I don't know about, YouTube, but a lot of our fundraising model has been wrapped into events for many years. And the inability to hold galas and to hold fundraising events, we had a hard time transitioning mentally some of our donors from that event model to something, to giving to programs, to giving to help, support the ongoing operation of the institution. And so it's been a bit of a slog, but we're confident going into our current fiscal year and really moving into, what we see is recovery in kind of, I know we're all tired of the phrase, the new normal, but that's what it is now.
And Melissa, you've got a particular situation in Las Vegas, right? You have citizens of Las Vegas who are serving the various hospitality industries, and they really rely on this as a keystone institution, an educational institution. Then you have visitors to Las Vegas who's, they're going to all the casinos, and then the kids have the kids' day, right? How is that? How is your revenue work and how has attendance worked throughout this whole period?
Well, just like every children's museum in the country, I mean, we had to shut down, mid-March, and we were closed through the end of June. And when we reopened, we knew we weren't going to be anywhere near regular capacity. We projected about 25% of normal capacity, but because we had an endowment and a commitment from our board that if we ever needed rainy day funds, let's make a commitment to this budget that we retain the staff and put our rainy day funds towards this rainy day, monitor closely, monitor expenses, monitor earned revenue. Our community also stepped up in a major gifts way and foundation way with some, gifts in the very beginning of the year with the challenge fund that helped us, know that we were going to weather, this much time. But fortunately, we were able to keep our entire team together so that when demand was there, we were able to meet the capacity, because hiring has been such a challenge right now in our industry of just finding, anyone who laid off staff or part-time staff. We were in a fortunate position to have retained hours from the just overall population. I mean, tourism makes up about 25% of our attendance. Tourism stopped in Las Vegas. Travel stopped. But so fortunately, we rely heavily on our, 2 million person regular population that came in. And for us, our Museums for All program, which offers families on public assistance a $3 admission, those visitorship numbers were through the roof. It was incredible to see that trust that had been built and those families taking advantage of what we had to offer during the time. So it's been interesting. Memberships in an interesting place right now. We could talk for a long time, but fortunately, I'd say for Discovery, because we had endowment and we're able to keep our staff, we're able to meet demand at this moment in time.
Aileen, we're going to give you the last word since we're coming to the end of our time. Could you take us out on a note of where these museums are going? Because it looks that with the advent of distance learning, a lot of computer stuff going on, that these kinds of institutions where you have in-person encounters and hands-on experiences, they're becoming more important. How do you see this field developing, and how do you see the Children's Museum of Manhattan developing over the next years to meet this moment and to provide the value that cannot be provided through an online educational experience?
Yeah. And I appreciate your closing with that, because I think that the first question that you posed to the audience, and that people didn't pick the social interaction as the number one thing. I think I would be curious if Melissa and Sarah agree that I think that that's what families look to us most for, because that was what was absolutely absent during all of the lockdowns, is that there was the absence of that time to be together, to connect. And we had children who'd spent their entire lives, half their lives, trapped in an apartment, right? And in a small New York City apartment. So I think that we're, as has been said, our audience values what we're offering and has come out, and we've been constrained because we've been operating under session models, as opposed to just, come in, as many people as, would be interested in a given day in order to manage the safety, challenges there. But we've seen that steady demand. We've seen it increasing as whenever we're providing those opportunities. So I think that I look with great hope towards the future, knowing that our model, that works, that we have families who appreciate it, and it's from families from all different backgrounds, and that our funders, have stood with us, our guests have stood with us, and that for that reason, I do think that the future is bright, and that the online, while it was necessary for a period of time, we certainly pivoted and provided those opportunities. There's nothing that beats that in-person experience, and that's what the children's museums, across the United States offer. So
such an important point, and so important to emphasize the skill, the dedication, the learning, the collaboration that you all embody. Aileen Hefferren, CEO and Director of the Children's Museum of Manhattan, Sarah Cole, CEO of the Glazer Children's Museum in Tampa, Florida, and Melissa Kaiser, CEO at Discovery Children's Museum in Las Vegas. Thank you so much. Please thank your boards, thank your staff, Thank your wonderful volunteers. Thank your families. Thank your funders for the work that you're doing. We so appreciate it. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you for having us.